Thank you, worship team. Welcome to church. My name is Pastor David, and we're starting the next handful of weeks. We're going to be talking about some I am statements that Jesus made, and I presume that a lot of you have probably made some I am statements about yourself along the way. You're like, I am good at this, or I am the best at this, or I am taller than my mother, or whatever the I am statement is. We probably haven't made the same I am statements that Jesus made. I hope not. It would be blasphemous, probably, most of them. But for Jesus, it's not, because he is what he says he is. And we're going to talk about that. So when I graduated from Bible college, I accepted my first, full-time, real position at a church. And my wife, LaVon, and I, we moved to Indiana, and I was a youth pastor, and kind of fresh out of college, getting, real paychecks for the first time in my life. And it felt so good, especially after the paychecks you got while you were in college, where they sucked most of that money back to themselves for the tuition. So those of you who've worked a part-time job at college where you owe the college money, I don't know if they still do it, but when I was there, they took part of your paycheck to go towards your tuition, which they had every right to do that. When you work on campus, that was the deal back then. So we moved to Indiana and youth pastoring. And not long after I was there, we had a girl in our youth group named Tiffany. I think she was 14 at the time. Her mom died of cancer. And it happened suddenly. From her noticing something wrong and then making her first appointments with the doctors to the time of her funeral was weeks. And as a recent college graduate, as just a young man back then, for the first time in my life, I felt truly inadequate. I wasn't doubting God's plan for my life to be a pastor. I didn't doubt God had given me certain talents to maybe speak or do things like that. I didn't doubt the temperament he'd given me. I didn't doubt most of that stuff, but I felt completely inadequate in that season. I felt like there was nothing I could do to help. And it was a rough handful of months as we tried to do whatever we could. It was hard, and there was nothing I could do. I'm going to tell you a story from John 11 where there was another death. And it's the story of, you've maybe heard this, it says a man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters Mary and Martha. And the two sisters, Mary and Martha, they send a message to Jesus telling him, your dear friend is very sick. And if you read through the Gospels, you'll see some interactions with that family and Jesus, and you see that there's a closeness that he had developed with them. And so they tell Jesus he is very sick. And for whatever reason, it says he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. And then in verse 14, you find out that Lazarus is dead. And then Jesus decides at that point to go to the town where they lived to be with them. And in verse 21, it says, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. Yes, Martha said, he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day. Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying. And so Jesus claims to be the resurrection and the life. And what is he saying when he makes that claim? And why does he differentiate resurrection and life? He seems to be saying these are two distinct things. Because in my mind, like, resurrection is kind of indicative of life, but he makes a distinction there. What does he want us to know about him when he makes that claim? How should our perception of him change? How should it change our perspective on life, on living? Why does Jesus need to be the resurrection and the life? When he says that, at first glance, my first thought is Jesus is claiming to be the source code for our present and our future. And like in computing, and I'm not a computer engineer or anything like that. I know how to turn it on, and I can operate a computer just fine. I'm really slow at typing, but if you have the source code of a program, you can kind of go in and make that program do what you want it to do. You can alter it and change it, and Jesus is claiming to be the source code for life, for resurrection. He was there in the beginning. It says he created us. He spoke us into existence. He holds the whole universe together. Every breath you take, he is aware of it. He's holding all of this in his hands. He's the source code. Everything in life and death ultimately flows through his will. Continuing on in the story, it says that Jesus, he gets to where Mary and Martha and their brother live, and he gets there and he says, "Where have you put him?" he asked. They told him, "Lord, come and see." And then verse 35, so John 11:35 just says, "Then Jesus wept." And I have to tell you, that's a verse I memorized at teen camp all those years ago, because you got points for memorizing verses. And so as a teenager, I was smart enough to pick the shortest verses to get the most points. So, but ultimately that verse, even though it just says Jesus wept, then Jesus wept, it actually says a lot more than that, doesn't it? I mean, this is one of those moments where Jesus, who is part of the Trinity, who is God, and yet has taken on human flesh and is living with us. He's confronting and dealing with death like everybody else. And he weeps alongside them. And the verse is just 3 words, but it's a powerful 3 words because it is telling us that when we face trying times, that when we encounter death, when we encounter sickness, when we encounter disease, Jesus isn't distant. He is near. And he isn't unfeeling. He isn't so far removed from who we are that he doesn't understand. He knows perfectly well. And in this moment, he weeps alongside, in the midst of grief with everyone else in this story. The people who were standing nearby said, "See how much he loved him." But some said, "This man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" And they bring him to where the tomb is. And he says, "Roll the stone aside," Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, "Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible." Jesus responded, "Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe?" So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of those people standing here, so that they will believe you sent me." Then Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes. His face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told him, unwrap him and let him go. And we see that even the dead hear the voice of Jesus calling them to life. And in this story, it's a literal dead person in a tomb. But I want to broaden that to people who are spiritually dead. Like, before we know Jesus, the Bible teaches us that it's like our spirits are dead. And when we are made new in Christ, when he gives us new life, he is bringing life to our spirit. And even those dead in spirit hear the voice of Jesus calling them to life. See, the fundamental problem that we face is sin and death. All of us. I don't know if you considered this when you woke up this morning. I hope you're not this pessimistic, but let me remind you that you today, April 12th, you are one day closer to your end. Right? Every day is another day closer to death. That's our fundamental problem, is it is on the horizon. And we don't necessarily know when, and some of you are going to live a long time, and some of you have already lived a long time, right? I'm not looking at anybody. But we're all going to die. See, the curse of sin is hostility and pain and struggle. And in Genesis 3, it says thorns and thistles. But ultimately, it is death. And all of us face it. Do you know who Ryan White is? I don't know if that name rings a bell. You have to be maybe of a certain age to know who Ryan White is. Ryan was born in 1971. So, and he was a teenager growing up in Kokomo, Indiana. And Kokomo, if you're unaware of Indiana, you got like Indianapolis, and then Kokomo is probably, I don't know, probably an hour and 20 minutes north of the Indianapolis area. And he was a hemophiliac, and that's a blood condition where you have trouble clotting and you can bleed too much. And he, so as part of his condition, he would get blood transfusions. And he was getting a blood treatment, and it was contaminated, and he contracted AIDS. And this is towards the beginning of what we would call like the AIDS epidemic. And he kind of became a poster child for the AIDS epidemic. And following his diagnosis, the doctors originally said that he maybe had 6 months to live. And this is in a time period when we didn't know a lot about AIDS. It was more or less something really scary for most people. And there wasn't really treatment options. And it had been a highly stigmatized disease. And here we have this teenager from a town in the middle of Indiana who gets it through a blood treatment at a hospital. And it started to shape our perception of what this is and who can contract it and how it affects us. And because it's such a new thing at that time, the school he attended, a lot of the parents banded together in the worst possible way, and they demanded that the school not allow him to attend. They were all afraid that their children would contract AIDS from him. They didn't understand how it's transmitted, and so the school initially like listened to those parents, and they didn't allow him to attend. And then there was a legal battle that took place, and after 9 months, he won his case and was allowed to attend school. But the school began to impose restrictions on him. He had to use paper plates and plastic silverware in the cafeteria. He and he suffered from bullying and just all the ugly things that can happen in high school, but it was ratcheted up. And it was so bad that his family decided that it wasn't worth it anymore, and so they pulled him out of that school, and he attended a high school, Hamilton Heights, in Cicero, Indiana, which is a town about a half hour south of Kokomo. And he outlived what the doctors had initially thought, and he didn't live. He lived longer than the 6 months. He lived nearly 5 years, and then April 8th, 1990, just a month before his graduation, he passed away. And the story of him and the impact it had, he became famous, but more than that, the largest provider of services for people living with AIDS in the United States is the Ryan White Care Act. It initially signed by George H.W. Bush into law, and it has been renewed 4 times and is still a funding that Congress gives out, and it's still one of the largest providers of taking care of people who suffer with HIV and AIDS, and because AIDS is still a huge epidemic. It has killed around 40 million globally, and another 29 million currently have it. But we have a lot better treatments now. My youth group kid, Tiffany, went to Hamilton Heights. As a youth pastor, I would go there and have lunch with students. Back then in a small town school, they were really happy to have different youth leaders and pastors and stuff come and hang out with their students. And so you'd meet with the guidance counselor and do paperwork and then get on the list, and you could come to school and hang out with students. And so I would do that, and so I've been there. Tiffany's mom, when she passed away, she was buried at the same cemetery as Ryan White. It's just a walk from one side to the other. I've been at both their gravestones. I have felt kind of the weight of sickness, disease, and death, and seeing how it affects a community and how it affects a family. Gravestones shape our perspective, don't they? When you stand in front of one, it changes what we think. Some people, we can stand in front of one and we can lose all hope. We can stand in front of one and just be overcome with grief. We can stand in front of one and be angry. But they change us. It shifts us. It forces us to encounter hurt, and it forces us to also think about our own future, our own death. But if Jesus is the resurrection in the life, why do people still die? I mean, isn't that the question we all want to ask? There is this story in Luke 8. It's a story of 2 daughters. Now, your Bible might give this story a different title. I always rename the stories because I like it. I'm calling it a story of 2 daughters. And it says this, starting at verse 41, we're going to read it. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. As Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. Coming up behind Jesus, she touched the fringe of his robe. Immediately, the bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. Everyone denied it, and Peter said, "Master, this whole crowd is pressing up against you." But Jesus said, "Someone deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me." When the woman realized that she could not stay hidden, she began to tremble and fell to her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed. "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking to her, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith, and she will be healed." When they arrived at the house, Jesus wouldn't let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, James, and the little girl's father and mother. The house was filled with people weeping and wailing. But he said, "Stop the weeping. She isn't dead, she's only asleep." But the crowd laughed at him because they all knew she had died. Then Jesus took her by the hand and said in a loud voice, "My child, get up." And at that moment, her life returned and she immediately stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were overwhelmed, but Jesus insisted that they not tell anyone what had happened. And if the story needs a second title, the second title is a story of Jesus being the resurrection and the life. The two daughters in that story have some unique similarities and some unique contrasts, right? Jairus' daughter was 12, and the other woman and the other daughter in the story, she'd been suffering for 12 years. The older daughter, she went to Jesus with some fear and some risk. But Jesus went to the younger daughter's house. Right? The older daughter, she had to reach out to Jesus to grab the fringe of his robe, it says. While the younger daughter, when Jesus went to her, Jesus reached out to her and took her hand. These are just little details, but there's some clues. It's two different daughters, but two similar outcomes, right? In the younger daughter, she is actually physically resurrected from death to life. The older daughter, her life had largely been taken from her. If you read the story from the Gospel of Mark, you get a kind of an expanded look at it, and she has spent all of her money on doctors trying to solve this issue, and now she is broke and hopeless. No one has been able to help her. And because of her bleeding condition, she has, from what we understand, she's kind of an outcast. And so while the younger daughter, when she dies, she is surrounded by people who loved her, by weeping and wailing, a house full of people who loved her. The older daughter, when she encounters Jesus, she is largely alone in the middle of a crowd. Afraid. Afraid to make herself known. Afraid to be seen. Afraid of what people may say or think of her. Two daughters, and in both the stories, Jesus is beautifully illustrating that he is the resurrection and the life. He restores the younger daughter to life, and he restores life back to the older daughter. See, when Jesus defined himself as the resurrection and the life, he declared victory over the curse of sin and was inducing hope in the new creation yet to come. He's saying, in the here and now, I can give you hope and a life. But sometime in the future, you're going to die, but then I'll return and you'll resurrect from death to life. We're all going to die, but in Christ we will all be resurrected. We just don't know the time frame. For some of you, you know your death is closer than what it was when you were, 20 years younger. In the time frame of when Jesus returns, that's anybody's guess. But we will all die, and in Christ we will be resurrected. Jesus is our source of new life today and our hope for a resurrected eternity. And that sounds great, right? But I'm here to tell you that there are times when you stand in front of a gravestone and it's hard to feel that. When you stand in front of a gravestone and maybe it's in front of somebody that you personally knew and that you were trying to help others in that process of grief and you felt so inadequate. Or maybe it's somebody that I never met Ryan White, but when I walked to his gravestone and I saw that, when I walked the halls in Hamilton Heights and I knew the story, you could feel the weight of that. And in those moments, I knew in my head that Jesus was the resurrection in my life, but it was hard in my heart to feel that. And in those moments, what I needed Jesus to be more. And I didn't know how to define that. I didn't know how to necessarily ask for that. What I knew is in those moments, I needed him to be more. In those moments of Mary and Martha, when they reached out to Jesus, they needed Jesus to be more. When Jairus went to Jesus, he was asking Jesus to be more. When the older daughter reached out and touched his robe, she was reaching out, hoping that Jesus would be more. And I think in our life, we often go through times when we simply need Jesus to be more. He claims to be the resurrection in the life, but right now, I just need him to be more. Whatever that looks like. You want him to be more. You want him to work in this situation or in this hurt or in this messiness over here. Or you've got somebody in your life that needs him and you don't know how to help them and you just need Jesus to be more. And I'm here to tell you that in my life, I've been through times where I needed him to be more, and I've been through times when he was. And sometimes the timing of that doesn't line up how I want. But what I can tell you all these years later is he is more. That when the time is right, when we're willing to do what the older daughter did and reach out to him, or we're willing to be like the younger daughter and have Jesus grab a hold of our hand, he can be more. He will be more. So here's how we're gonna close kind of this portion of the service, and then everybody from the kids wing and stuff, they're all gonna come back in and we're gonna do some baptisms. It's gonna be awesome. But here's what I want to simply do. I just want you to bow your head for just a moment with me. Just bow your head. And I want you to simply think about this question. Do I need Jesus to be more? Do I need Jesus to be more? And if you do, whatever the circumstance is, if you need Jesus to be more, while everyone's heads are down, will you just raise a hand and just say, I need Jesus to be more. I just need him to be more. And just raise your hand and put it back down. And all you're doing is you're just acknowledging, you're saying to him, I need more from you right now. You are the resurrection and the life, and I believe that, but in this moment, I need some of that. I want to pray for you. Dear Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life. You are able to reach out and heal. You're able to reach out and resurrect. But you're the same Jesus who walked into a situation and cried with us. So I don't know what more looks like in our lives. I know at times in my life I knew what more looked like. And I know there's been times where where it felt like you were delayed. And that's how Mary and Martha felt. Jesus, if you'd only come sooner. And there were other times when you showed up at just the right moment and you were more. And you made all the difference in my life.